여기 대체 어디야?
집이지?
I mean, man, first of all, obviously, I got to say congrats on everything, but specifically the Oscar nomination. I can't even, obviously that whole experience always feels like a whirlwind, but I can't even wrap my head around what it feels like this year, where you're kind of like in your bubble.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's been really surreal. Well, first of all, thank you. But yeah, it is this thing of like, it's an already surreal experience feels even more surreal because it's been all virtual. It's been all on Zooms and on, but it's been really fun to kind of go through it with my collaborators, with Isaac and Steven and Christina and the other people that have been sort of, worked on the film, and I've been talking about the film, and kind of we're all just really thrilled about the way that it's connecting with people and resonating with people. It's been exciting to see it unfold that way. So that helps it feel more grounded,
Well, I want to talk, specifically about the score, and I think the best place to start is when you were first brought into this project. And I wondered if you could talk me through what the initial meetings with Isaac were like and everything.
Sure, yeah. Well, I initially met Isaac at the Los Angeles premiere of The Last Black Man in San Francisco, a film that I had scored. Also for Christina my friend Christina had produced it, both films, Minari and Last Black Man. And she had brought Isaac and Steven Yeun, who stars in the film, to see The Last Black Man, and introduced us after the screening. And a few days before that, she'd sent me his script, and she'd sent him my music. It was kind of a little bit of setup, She was sort of setting us up or putting the feelers out and seeing if it would be a good fit. And then we got together a few days later and had lunch in our neighborhood, and we started talking about his film, and we started talking about, more emotionally and spiritually where it was coming from, and how that could be mirrored musically and what that would look like. And that was sort of an experience that we'd, it wasn't really about specifics. It was more about the story he was trying to tell, where he's from, also just trying to gauge if we were a good vibe. When you first meet somebody, you could love somebody's work and not know if it's a good, I could be a total nightmare and you might not know, so it was a little bit of that. But I think he told me that he'd started writing the script by writing 80 snapshot memories from his childhood, all these sort of visceral tiny things, like just one memory after another. He wrote them down, and then he strung them together to make this story. And the script really resonated with me. I felt like I was immediately emotionally invested. I felt like I immediately cared about this family. And then I was just inspired by that. And then I wrote a bunch of music before they started shooting and sent it to them so that they could have it, in hand while they were filming and while they were editing the film.
Yeah, I've read about that a little bit. The fact that you had just the script and obviously those conversations with Isaac to go off of. Have you done a score that way before?
I had not. No. I for previous films that I'd scored, I'd gotten involved a little later on in the process, where there was a rough cut or sometimes even a locked cut, and I had to find then have my music fit the scenes, which is also an exciting challenge and a whole other experience. This was a treat for me because it felt like the music could have a little bit more room to breathe. I felt like the music could have a little bit more leg room. And Harry Yeun, who edited the film, who's brilliant, had most of the themes and most of the music I'd written on hand before he started assembling the film. So it's sort of baked into the batter of the thing in a way that I hadn't experienced before. Like some of the edits were tailor-made to fit the music rather than vice versa, which I was really grateful for. It was really exciting to work that way.
Baked into the batter. That's an interesting way to put it. And I totally see what you mean, of course.
Yeah, rather than it being like overlaid.
Sure.
Like the music is not on top of it. It feels like with this process, you always want it to feel like it's not
Mhm.
layered on top of it or overlaid. You always want it to feel like it's one and the same, you know. And my favorite film scores are like that, where you hear two notes of the score and the whole film comes flooding back.
So how, I guess as specific as you can get, are there elements of the script of the story that you really pulled from? Like, how did you find, for lack of a better way to put it, the sonic palette of this film? How did you know what instruments that you wanted to use? What were you pulling from?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, that's always a fun part of the process
Hmm.
is because you're really kind of going fishing and seeing what you catch. It's not you don't really know why certain instruments are going to work for a certain film, or and why certain other ones won't, you know. With this, I'd written from singing. I'd sang and played the piano. So all the sketches, all the initial ideas were based on the piano and my voice. I would sing these melodies, and then from there I would experiment with other orchestration. I doubled my piano with I have an old acoustic guitar from the 40s that I detuned, and that's always sort of doubling the piano to give it a sort of different, more earthy, grounded, organic sound. And then I experimented with this monopoly, this Korg synthesizer from the 80s, that because the film takes place in the 80s, I wanted to experiment with some kind of synthetic element as a sort of a subtle nod to it. But then I felt that was giving it this sort of more alien sound, or this more like theremin type quality that was making the film feel more dreamlike, because the film is essentially a love letter to Isaac's childhood. It's about childhood memory, and dreams are kind of occupy the same sort of elusive spirit that you can't really, you know. I think that certain instruments ended up working for those reasons, but it wasn't so calculated as that. You never go in saying, okay, this is going to be what could be dreamlike. You know, we didn't even talk about the word dreamlike or childhood memory or earthy or grounded. Like, these are just sort of words that we find later on when we figure out how to talk about the work afterwards, you know. But it's always just an exploration, you know.
Yeah, I mean, dreamy is certainly what comes to mind to me, and there are just times, you know, I think to my untrained ear where I'm like, okay, that is a human voice singing, and the next thing I know, I'm like, well, wait, this is a theremin now. I think there's an element to a lot of it where it does kind of blend together and add to that otherworldliness, which I really
Cool.
loved.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's great to hear that that's translating. Yeah, it's the idea is this to sort of build this sort of other thing out of these different elements that you can't quite, like, even the theremin. I always double the theremin with a woodwind, you know, with a flute
Mm-hmm.
or an ocarina, so that the organic sound and the synthetic sound were kind of intertwined and became a third sound, like a new thing. So I think that, yeah, you find that in the process. And
Yeah, I mean, it's fun on multiple listens then to go back and really try and unpack the layers to it. One piece of the score that I wanted to get a little bit more into is Garden of Eden is the title, obviously very evocative. And
oh,
that
cool.
scene, that
Thank you.
montage is very, very dreamlike in a sense too. I think we're really seeing the Yi family explore this new world for the first time, and kind of you feel them making it their home. So it's obviously an extremely crucial scene. Wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the thought process behind that. I think I hear some flute driving a little bit of that. And
Sure, yeah. Well, yeah, that was one of the first melodies that I'd written for this film. Because in this script, there was a scene in the script where Jacob, Stephen Yeun's character, rides a tractor. So I had written a piece of music that I'd called Tractor, which was essentially the same melody. And it hadn't changed much from that original version. That was one of the scenes where the music came first, and then Harry and Isaac edited this scene together. That was really the first time that the family, like you said, that the Yi family had embraced the land. And I mean, Jacob had already been obsessed with the land. The land to him is this religious thing to him. It's a drug to him. It's like it's a sanctuary to him. It means all these things to him. Like it's a promise of a new life, really. And he has this obsession with it. But until that scene, we haven't seen his wife and kids, especially Monica's wife, really embrace the land and absorb it as a family. And I think that it's a complicated thing because his family has been displaced and she's been displaced and she's trying to keep it all together. So it's not the tone of the scene and the tone of the piece of music, it's not fully celebratory. It's not fully, there's a darkness in it, I think, but there's also a beauty in that scene that the music had to rise to, you know? So it was really fun to see it all come together and work out that way, you know, and to have it go from a line in the script that Jacob rides the tractor to then see how Lachlan, the cinematographer, and Isaac had so beautifully shot this, and these incredible performances, to see how it all became real, you know, was really exciting. You know, from just a seed of a line in a script, and the fact that the music was a part of that was really exciting for me, you know.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of, especially what you see and hear in the scene, it speaks to how, I guess I want to say non-literal the music is, and of course the best way. I mean, if you're reading on the page, "Man rides a tractor," I think anyone's instinct is like, okay, we're gonna hear some guitar, we're gonna hear like some Western music, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. Well, a part of that is a testament to Isaac. Sorry,
mm,
yeah, I just that he one of the first things he said to me was that he didn't want the music to sound Korean or American. He didn't want it to be like a heartland, like Americana, like
mhm,
acoustic guitar and harmonica kind of sound, or a Korean sound, or an 80s sound. It had to be kind of none of those things, but still spiritually connected to all three of those things. So like with any film composer, our job is to follow the direction of the director, and those decisions were, you know, he set those guardrails, and he had the instincts to avoid some things that would be expected, like you mentioned, you know.
right. So, I mean, with this film, with Last Black Man in San Francisco, Kajillionaire, these are all, you know, in some senses, extremely personal. I mean, obviously, this is Isaac's story in a lot of ways. What does that feel like to really be brought into something that is so close to them, and does that add, I guess, pressure, for lack of a better way to put it, to tell their story?
For sure, yeah. No, it feels it's a great question. It feels with all three of these films, it feels incredibly. It's like an honor to be a part of it, and it's a dream for any composer to work on something that's such a deeply personal work. Like all three of these films are, the filmmakers are ripping out their hearts and putting
Hmm.
it on the screen in a way there's a vulnerability to it and a purity to it that's really special, and not every film is like that. So, but then they're also, like you said, that comes with the responsibility for the anyone who's working on it, not just the composer, to rise to that and to have the truthfulness in the script, or the truthfulness in the film, be mirrored by the truthfulness in the purity of the music, you know. And it's a tricky thing to navigate because, yeah, Isaac made this film that's incredibly personal, but there's a lot of love in this film. You can feel the love that this family has for one another underneath all of it. But it's packaged in a way it's hyper realism. It's dreamlike, and it's both surreal and dreamlike in that it's his childhood memory, but it's also like a family dealing with everyday things,
Hmm.
and there's dissonance, and there's friction, and there's a real struggle, you know. So the music had to honor that, both those things, the love of the family and the struggle. Each piece of music felt like it had to contain both, rather than going from a piece of music that feels celebratory or like a love theme to something that feels more dissonant. You know, the goal with this film was to have each piece of music have both. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. You know, I'm also curious, like the music, the score has the function within the film, but this is, you know, I think maybe the case often, but this especially feels so with this, like this music, I have the temptation to listen to it, you know, anytime when I'm working, when I'm doing something else. That
That's
I think it
awesome.
stands on its
Thanks, man.
own. So, oh, of course, it stands so much on its own too.
No, it's always nice to hear. Yeah, and that's always the goal, is
Mm-hmm.
to write something that can stand alone as a piece of music. And all my favorite scores do that, you know, um, outside of the context of the film. And it's just about trying to choose films or be lucky enough to work with collaborators that like what you do, you know, so that you
Mm-hmm.
can make something that you would want to listen to, or that would stand alone, and it also doesn't feel like it's forced into the film. Like, because
Mm-hmm.
first and foremost, its function is to serve and enhance the storytelling and highlight certain things and elevate the film. And then if it happens to be a good piece of music outside of the film, that's ideal. But I think that that's sort of the general way of thinking about it. But I think that, you know, I'm just lucky that I found directors and collaborators that let me write music that I would want to listen to, or that feels like they could work as a record. And then there's a whole other part of the process of turning the film score into a record, where there's certain scenes
Right.
are extended and there's bonus material and there's a sequence and there's editing and there's remixing and all this stuff to create that experience where the album is its own thing. But that's something that's very important to me, just because I come from bands and I make records
Right.
outside of film, and I try to treat all these records like they would be any record, because film music and band music, they're all the kind of the same thing, you know. At the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, it's all just music, so you try to make it as good as you can.
Well, and jumping off of that point to some degree, I mean, there are on the record there are songs on here. There are songs. We have the spoken word. I know that
Hmm.
Yeti Han sang some of these for you, and I wondered,
Yeah.
was that part of the initial scoring process to some degree, or did that come after the fact?
That came after the fact. Yeah, that was, so I had written a song without lyrics that opens the film. It's called Big Country. And then I we were trying to figure out what was going to be the play over the closing credits.
Mm.
And it was a challenge because there's always it's always sort of the last thing, you know, like what's going, and we try different suites and different things, but I thought it would be cool to have that song that plays in the beginning of the film instrumentally have a lyric and have a vocal at the end of the film, so that it's bookended by this one piece of music, and so that you leave the theater with that feeling of that one piece of music.
I think as a final note, something I wanted to bring up was I'd be curious if you had seen this or heard anything of this on Twitter. At least one person had mentioned watching this movie, and you know, I think A24 has this reputation for putting out very thoughtful, smart horror films, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that someone had mentioned, you know, we get the opening scene. This kind of speaks to the otherworldliness of the music. We have the family driving in. They hear the score. They were, I don't know how much of a lie this was, but they were like, I was fully expecting this to get like turned into a horror movie. I think the music maybe like halfway queued them up.
Oh wow, that's amazing. That's interesting. No, I hadn't heard that, but yeah, they've made so many great
Oh
films
my God.
in that
Yeah.
genre as well. So I could you see the logo, you hear some ethereal music, and you think, oh, is somebody gonna lose a head, you know?
Right. Yeah, you never know. A kid in the car, exactly. That's a trigger point right there.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. We take these traumas with us, from film to film as film viewers.
Yeah.
That's funny though. No, I hadn't heard that.
결혼하면서 했던 말 기억나? 미국에 가서 서로를 구해주자고 했던 거.
기억해.